What's going on, guys? Welcome to another Doctor Who ranking video. Today I'm going to be ranking the Cyberman stories. Now, for this one, there are going to be 15 stories that I'm going to be ranking here. This is all the Cyberman stories from the 10th planet, all the way up until the currently most recent Cyberman story, World Enough and Time and the Doctor Falls. Now, the only exception to this is that the Wheel in Space will not be on this list. The Wheel in Space, if you don't know, is not available on DVD because it is largely lost. So the only way you can really experience the story at all at the moment is through audio, just listening to it in audio. It's not been released on DVD, obviously in its normal form or in animated form yet, so because of that I'm not going to have this on the list at all. We're just focusing on the 15 stories that you can actually watch in some form. So anyway, let's get started. Number 15. Nightmare in Silver. Now this one doesn't work for me on multiple levels. First of all, having two kids that Clara's been looking after when she's like a nanny, Archie and Annie are they called? I can't even remember, to be honest. They're that forgettable and that bad. Having them in the story is terrible because they literally don't really serve a purpose. They're just there to be annoying and completely useless. So that's off-putting. The Doctor, when he gets kind of taken over by the Cyber Planet, is interesting. I think Matt Smith does a good enough performance, but there for me isn't enough differentiation between the Doctor and the Cyber Planner. I think Matt Smith does a great job with it, but yeah, there just isn't as much differentiation as I would have liked. But ultimately, this story, I don't like the Cybermen. I really don't like the Cybermen at all in this story. They upgraded the design of them. I don't really like this look for them. I don't really like the voices. I really don't like how they move around super quickly. Puts me off so much. So yeah, it's mainly the Cybermen actually that put me off a lot in this one. Number 14. Silver Nemesis. This one's a bit all over the place, to be honest. On one hand, there's a lot of really great direction and camera work in this one, with the Cybermen in particular. I think the Cybermen look amazing in this story with the way they're shot and directed. There's some great action scenes, especially with Ace, when she's fighting them on top of, in that like warehouse. Some really awesome scenes there, and I was quite gripped in those scenes. However, there's also a lot of really annoying stuff going on. First of all, this is probably, I think, the worst example of the Cybermen's kind of kryptonite being gold. This is literally the worst example of it. They just get shot by golden bow and arrows and they're dead, and they just seem so weak a lot of the time. The stupid thing with, the people from the past coming into it, it just feels a bit convoluted, and altogether the story feels convoluted and a bit kind of strange in tone at times. Also, I felt like the end was a bit all over the place. So yeah, this story is really just a bit too all over the place, with additions of things like the gold that I just don't like. Number 13. Closing Time. Alright, so it's Matt Smith's other Cyberman story, so yeah, sadly the 11th Doctor Cyberman stories really do come down the end of the list. But Closing Time, to be honest, in this one, there's a few things that are working, but the Cybermen really aren't one of them. For a starter, I think the Cybermen are very much pushed to the background of the story. It's much more focused on the Doctor and Craig. The Cybermen are just kind of, here, we've got a villain for the story, let's just have the Cybermen. They're kind of just there. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think the Cybermats are more prominent in this story than the Cybermen themselves, and it's cool to see the Cybermats again, but to be honest, they don't do a whole lot. However, the main thing that puts me off with this story is that it has a similar ending to what the Lodger did in a lot of ways, with, Craig gets converted basically into a Cyberman, but then his love for his son manages to break him free, and I just think it's such a stupid ending. I mean, the Cyberman thing, the Cyberman closed on him and everything, but he just manages to come back out and it's perfectly fine. I really don't like that ending. Number 12. Attack of the Cybermen. Now this one's a bit weird for me, and I think it's one that I do have to watch again to really get a proper understanding of it, because when I watched this one, I was actually really tired that night, and I think I fell asleep for about half of one of the episodes. But when I was watching it, maybe it just wasn't because I was in the mood for it, but I felt like it was a decent enough story. The stuff with the Cybermen was relatively interesting, nothing too amazing. I did like the reintroduction of that character, I can't remember his name now, but the guy who was also in, I think, Resurrection of the Daleks with the 5th Doctor. I liked how we got him back again in a Cyberman story. I thought that was pretty cool. The Cybermen themselves in this one were pretty decent. I really liked the end bit where the Doctor, shoots the Cybermen, maybe a bit out of character, but for the 6th Doctor I think it works quite well. And I also loved the blood and the gore in this episode. That was it. Once again I can't remember his name, but the guy getting his hands crushed and the blood coming from his hands, really gory stuff. I did though just find this one, maybe it's just because I wasn't in the mood, but I did feel it a little bit slow. Number 11. Revenge of the Cybermen. I'd heard a lot of pretty bad things about this one going into it. I actually only watched it recently, and I wasn't really expecting a whole lot, and when I watched it, to be honest, I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I think I had such low expectations of it from what I heard that I didn't necessarily find it good, but I just kind of thought it was an average okay story. The Cybermen are decent. We kind of get the introduction of the whole gold being their kryptonite thing, but it isn't actually used that much in this story, which I do quite like. I mean, there's stuff going on with the characters that I do quite like, and also things that I don't like. Is it the Vogans that are in this story? They are decent, they're just kind of there, they don't do a whole lot. I mean, they're a big part of the plot, but just as an alien race and with what they're doing, they're not the most exciting. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of just your run-of-the-mill Cyberman story. It's nothing amazing, but for me, it isn't anything particularly bad either. Number 10. Dark Water and Death in Heaven. Now this one's interesting. It has elements that I really like, and it has elements that I'm not so big of a fan on. I do think that Dark Water is a relatively interesting episode to start off the story with. Of course, there's a two-parter, and Dark Water does a pretty good job of introducing us to what's going on. We get the introduction of Missy, who we eventually find out is actually the new incarnation of the Master. At this current point in time, after this story, I wasn't the biggest fan of Missy. To be honest, I was never the biggest fan of her altogether. I know, controversial, but in this one especially, I didn't really care for her that much. But and the whole reveal was like, oh, okay. I mean, it was a pretty big reveal, to be honest. But the Cybermen themselves, I don't really understand what was going on with the whole water thing. I mean, I can kind of get it, but it was a little bit strange for me. But yeah, I thought Dark Water, the first part, was actually very enjoyable. It was a pretty good setup, I thought. Actually, a really good setup. Death in Heaven, though, I think brought it down a little bit. The flying Cybermen and Danny Pink being a Cyberman, I think it pushed it a bit too far, but it's still relatively enjoyable. Number 9. The Next Doctor. Another one that maybe I actually think is a little bit better than some other people say. The Next Doctor seems to really get forgotten about, especially in the Christmas specials and just in the special year of 2009. I really enjoyed The Next Doctor. Now, to be honest, I didn't enjoy it because of the Cybermen necessarily. I thought the Cybermen were decent in this. I didn't really care for the Cyber King. I didn't mind it. I mean, some people really hated it. I didn't hate it, I just thought it was alright. It was a bit of a silly, bonkers idea, but I didn't mind it. The Cybermen themselves were alright. They didn't do a whole lot, to be honest. It was more focused on Jackson Lake and what was going on with him, and what happened with him with the Cybermen in the past. But I did really like Jackson Lake's character. David Morrissey played it amazingly. I think he would have played a really good, actual, proper Doctor. And, you know, this one maybe comes a little bit further down because the Cybermen weren't really the main thing that I loved about the story, but still, as a story altogether, I do quite enjoy it. Number 8. The Tomb of the Cybermen. I'm sure people are going to have a go at me for having this one so low down, but I still think the Tomb of the Cybermen is a pretty good story. I think it is slightly overrated, quite overrated actually, and it overlooks a lot of much better, well, I say much better, relatively a decent amount better Cyberman stories around it, but the Tomb of the Cybermen is still a good story. Now, my main issue with this one is that I do think that the Cybermen take a little bit too long to get into it. We know right from the start, 1 from the title and 2 because literally at the start of the episode we can see that we're going into the Cybermen's tomb. It's obvious, they literally say it in the episode, so we know what's going on. It takes like half of the story for the Cybermen to even properly show up, which I don't enjoy. The guest cast is a very big guest cast, and to be honest, none of them really did much for me. But there are some great moments like the Cybermen bursting out of their tombs and the Doctor and Victoria's speech that really do make this one enjoyable. Number 7. Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. This one is the finale for Series 2, and it's a really enjoyable finale. And it gets relatively high up on this list. It's just above halfway up the list, about halfway actually. The reason why it doesn't get any higher, it actually probably would have been, well, it would have been above the next place one, but I'll talk about that in the next listing, in the next ranking, sorry, should I say, for the next episode. But the reason why this one is a little bit lower is because it's a really, really good story, but I don't think it's great for the Cybermen in a lot of ways, because the Daleks are also in this story, especially, you know, for Doomsday. I think the Cybermen are good for what they are in Army of Ghosts. When it comes to Doomsday though, and the Daleks come in, the Daleks overshadow the Cybermen completely. They absolutely obliterate them and make the Cybermen look stupid, so that does put me off them a little bit. I also don't really understand why they like, you know, group up with the Doctor, which is a little bit strange, but yeah, I mean, it's an enjoyable story, but the Cybermen definitely aren't the main great thing about it. Number 6. Rise of the Cybermen and the Age of Steel. So yeah, this is the one that I'm talking about. If I was doing an actual ranking of the episodes just in general, this would be just below Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. But when I was doing this Cyberman ranking, I thought I would put this above because I think this does a much better job of the Cybermen because it is a purely Cyberman story. It's basically the genesis of the cyber industry Cybermen, which I think is pretty cool. It's the introduction to the Cybermen, the reintroduction to the Cybermen for the new series. I think it just does a really good job. John Lumic's a little bit kind of weird in the way he talks and the way he acts and stuff, but you know, I can kind of get over that. There is some strange stuff in there. I think some of my favourite things in this one though is Mickey. Mickey is such a badass in this story. His character really develops through this whole thing, like it has been through the whole of the first 2 series. But the Cybermen themselves as well are just really good, and I really enjoy watching this episode for a lot of reasons. Number 5. The 10th Planet. This is the first ever Cyberman story, so yeah, it does a good job getting at number 5. The Mondasian Cybermen are they are probably the creepiest Cybermen. They're probably not my favourite Cybermen designs, but they are definitely the creepiest. There's no doubt about that. Just the look of them with the cloth over their faces, and just the way they look, and the way they are the most human looking of the Cybermen. The way they talk as well, those voices. Some people absolutely hate the voices and think they sound really ridiculous and outdated, but I think they sound so creepy. And they really do creep me out with the sing-songy voices. The story itself is relatively basic. It's kind of your normal base Under Siege story that you'd come to see in a lot of the Patrick Troughton stories. But it really works here. I think it's let down a little bit by William Hartnell not being in episode 3 at all. But apart from that, it's really enjoyable. I really like this one. Of course, it's also the first ever regeneration story, so that really boosts it up as well. And yeah, I just had a blast watching this one. Number 4. The Invasion. Yes, this is the most recent Cyberman story I had to watch, the last one I had to watch, and then I'd watched them all, apart from Real in Space. And yeah, The Invasion, it's a really good story, it really is. It's 8 parts long. It actually doesn't really feel like it drags too much. I think it could have been a little bit shorter, it could have been like a 6-parter, but it's not so bad. I'm not like begging for it so much because it's boring, because it isn't boring. I just feel like it could have been a 6-parter and maybe been a bit better. Could have been a bit rushed in some ways as well, but I don't know. It works as an 8-parter. I do feel like the Cybermen take way too long to come in. It's like literally the end of part 4, halfway through, when they come in, which for me is a little bit long, but the reason why it gets all the way up here is because Tobias Vaughn, who is the main villain for the whole story, but especially for the first 4 parts, does such a good job throughout. And when the Cybermen do eventually come in, you've got the really iconic scenes of the Cybermen walking around London, and just some really iconic stuff. So yeah, it's just very enjoyable. Number 3. World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls. This is my favourite of the new series Cyberman stories, which is pretty interesting because usually I kind of go for the RTD era stuff, but this is one where I do prefer the Stephen Moffat Cyberman story, so yay for Stephen Moffat, you did a bloody good job with this one. Now, if it wasn't for The Doctor Falls, if we were just counting World Enough and Time here, honestly, it could have been number 1. It honestly could have been. World Enough and Time is such a creepy story. It's actually not a very action-packed story, which is weird for me because I tend to like more of the action-packed stories where there's more going on, whereas there is a lot going on in World Enough and Time, but it's definitely a slower story. There's not as much. It's just creepy. It's really creepy. Then the Doctor Falls, I still do quite enjoy the Doctor Falls, but it definitely does take some things away. The addition of the Master, I feel, is good, but not really needed in it. And the Cybermen themselves are still good in the Doctor Falls, but they don't quite get to that high and the creep factor that World Enough and Time did. Number 2. Earthshock. This is one of the fan favourite Cyberman stories, and for good reason. Earthshock is an amazing story. It introduces these new versions of the Cybermen, which we get to see for the rest of the 80s and the rest of Classic Who. I do quite like these Cybermen. They're a bit more human sounding. They actually have a bit more emotion to their voice, but not necessarily just to them, so it still works for me. It was also possibly the first Cyberman I ever saw, even before the new series Cyber Industry Cybermen, because I'm pretty sure I saw the 5 Doctors fairly early on. So yeah, I mean, Earthshock is just a brilliant story with the 5th Doctor, one of the 5th Doctor's best stories. I mean, I can imagine at the time, of course I didn't get to experience this, but at the time, there was no rumors or anything that the Cybermen were coming back. They hadn't been back for so long, it had been so many years, and the cliffhanger at the end of part 1 would have just been amazing if you didn't know the Cybermen were in the story. There's also, of course, Adric's tragic death at the end. This story has so much going for it. Number 1. The Moon Base. This was the Second Doctor's first Cyberman story out of 4. The Cybermen would become the Second Doctor's villain, and I mean, they still are the Second Doctor's villain. He's pretty much had the most stories with them. For me, I was saying Tomb of the Cybermen before, it overshadows a lot of stories. This one is the one I was really referring to. I think Tomb massively overshadows the Moon Base. Maybe it's just because I saw the Moon Base first. The Moon Base was actually the first ever Patrick Troughton Second Doctor story I watched, so perhaps I've got a lot of love for it because of that. I fell in love with the Second Doctor. I fell in love with the Cybermen. I mean, I was already in love with the Cybermen, but I fell more in love with the Cybermen with this story. I just love the base under siege feel of it. It does have a very similar feel to the 10th planet. I mean, of course, the Moon Base is the second ever Cyberman story, and it does have a lot of those feels of the 10th planet, but I really like these new versions of the Cybermen. The way they talk and everything's so creepy, and I just really like the Moon Base. I can't wait to go and watch it again. Alright, so there we have it. That's my ranking of all the Cyberman stories in Doctor Who. How would you guys rank these stories? You can have the wheel and space in there if you would like. You're more than welcome to do that. Just, you know, if you don't want to do that, what's your favourite? What are your top 3, your top 5, your top 10? What Cyberman stories do you love? Would you like to see the Cybermen return? I mean, obviously they're going to return. There's rumours of them returning in Series 12, which I'm interested about. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the Cybermen? What are your favourite stories? Just keep it going in the comments and that would be awesome. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead, like and subscribe. Go into the description and follow me on Twitter. I'll see you guys in the next video.